Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim, and this is WebYeshiva.org. And it's time to begin uh, our regular halacha shir. Our topic for this evening is kashering utensils, which you've used all year long, preparing for use on Pesach, preparing utensils which you've used all year long, and all year long you did not use them for chametz. Well, what do you have to do to prepare them for use on Pesach? In the lovely image, we have here, for example, a picture of a mixer. Well, let's just assume that you've used the mixer all year long for fruit smoothies, and never had any chametz in it at all. Can you continue, or how can you continue to use that on Pesach? As far as the toaster is concerned, it's not obvious to me what you would want to use the toaster for on Pesach, but it's also not obvious to me what you would have used the toaster for all year long that's not chametz. But in some case, where that happens to be true, the same question arises. Similarly, the electric water kettle used all year long just for water and nothing else. What about using for Pesach? And similarly, any other utensil which all year long was not used for chametz, what about using it on Pesach? Well, let's see the mikorot, let's see the sources, and see what they have to teach us. How do I get this on the screen? I click, voila. Okay, I begin with the Magen Avram. Why am I missing my thing? Here we go. The Magen Avram. Now, as in all of my shiurim, the sources which I'm going to be quoting are the sources from the leading poskim, the greatest poskim, those who are most widely accepted, the mainstream, the most influential poskim. And I'm not going to bother mentioning exactly the chapter and paragraph number that I'm quoting, because you always have that on the screen if you want to look up the exact chapter number and page number and so forth. I give that all on the screen so you can look up the sources and see what my typing errors are. I'm not a very good typist. But in any event, the Magen Avram, his name was Rabbi Gambiner, Avram Gambiner, but in the Yeshiva world he's just called the Magen Avram, one of the two principal commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. People can argue about which is the most important commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, but this is right up there with the all-time most important commentaries. 17th century Eastern Europe. He quotes the Maharil, one of the great Ashkenaz medieval authorities. Kli shepihu tsar, a utensil which has a narrow mouth. That means you have a tea kettle, a water kettle or something with a narrow spout that comes out of it. He calls that a narrow mouth. There's no way to rub it inside. There's no way to scrub it inside the narrow mouth, inside the spout. Sheyesh lo kanim, or a utensil which has tubes in it, so something where some narrow space where you can't get in there to scrub. If you cannot get in there to scrub, asur b'hagala, you're not allowed to prepare it for Pesach by kashering it. You're not allowed to kasher it and prepare it for Pesach. This is the absolute fundamental principle of all kashering. This is the fundamental principle which governs all of preparation of utensils used all year long for Pesach, treif utensils for kosher, milchik utensils being prepared for meat. The clean is the first absolute primary requirement. The utensil has to be perfectly clean, and then we can talk about what the second step is. But if you can't get the utensil perfectly clean, then how to kosher is no longer an issue. You're not allowed to kosher it if you can't get it exquisitely clean. Now, there are all kinds of utensils in which this problem arises. For example, many knives are made of of two parts: the handle, typically wood or plastic, and the blade, metal, unless you have ceramic knives, and where the handle and the blade meet, well, if the knife is in good condition, that's a very clean meat. There's no crevice. There's no room for gunk to accumulate, and therefore there's nothing to clean. But as soon as the knife is no longer in great condition and it loosens up a little bit and you have a little gap uh, between the handle and the blade, if you cannot clean in there, if you cannot make it perfectly and exquisitely clean, then the whole question of koshering it, whether it's treif and you want to use it for kosher, or whether you use it all year long and you want to use it for Pesach, the whole question of koshering arises only after the utensil is perfectly clean. Now this raises the question which the poskim have been discussing through the generations, that of the samovar. I have here somewhere a picture of a samovar. Here's the picture. Well, yeah, there are all kinds of models of samovar. A samovar is a self-heating uh, water kettle. A self-heating water kettle. It stands here by itself. Nowadays, the samovars all have electric heating elements in it. Back in the good old days, before there was electricity, so there was a cylinder which would fit into it from the top. The cylinder would have coal or wood in it. You'd burn the coals or the wood, and that would heat the water in the samovar. That's a self-heating water kettle, and of course, the samovar has a pezar, a narrow mouth, a kind of spout. Ah, well, how you going to clean in there? It's too narrow to get in there to scrub. If you can't get in there to scrub, to clean it, then it would seem that it cannot be prepared for Pesach. And of course, up here, this picture doesn't show what you would put up here. Up here, you would put your pot of tea concentrate, liquid tea concentrate in Torah observant homes. Many Torah observant homes, they like to prepare tea concentrate for dilution on Shabbos. In the good old days in Russia, when all was right in the world under the czars of Russia, well, not only on Shabbos, not only Jews, the normal way of preparing tea was to put highly concentrated tea kept warm up here on the top of the samovar, and then you would, when you wanted to drink a cup of tea, you would dilute it, typically 10 parts water to 1 part concentrated tea. So in any event, the samovar is the subject of discussion, which has been going on for generations. Let's see what the poskim have to say about using the samovar. We begin with the Torat Avigdor, which is the most frequently quoted authority on this matter. He was the Rav of this town in White Russia in the 19th century, but his opinions are considered definitive on this particular matter. He's quoted over and over again by all the subsequent authorities. First, he quotes the Magen Avram that we saw earlier. If you can't get into the spout to scrub it clean, who knows what's there, and therefore it cannot be koshered for Pesach. After he quotes the Magen Avram, he continues as follows. These are now the words of the Torat Avigdor. Lefi zeh lo yafeh osim hamon. According to Magen Avram, what the multitudes are doing, what all the ordinary Jewish families are doing throughout Eastern Europe, nohagim lahagil samovarin al Pesach, the common practice of doing hagala, taking the samovar and immersing the whole thing in boiling water, which is in fact what the people were doing. The people were in fact koshering their samovars by immersion in boiling water. Pshitahu da'asa, it's obvious that this is all wrong and the people should not be doing it. In fact, the people are koshering their samovar. In fact, they're unable to clean, to scrub inside the spout. and therefore what the people are doing is simply wrong. And if we had the power to stop them from doing it, we would. Oh, Havale Klisha Piatzar. The samovar is a perfect example of something which you cannot guarantee perfect cleanliness, because who knows what's going on in the spout. Yesh lo kondom. In addition to the spout, it has inside these pipes which hold the burning wood or the burning coals or whatever it is that's heating the water before they have electricity.
Yeah.
It's for Rabbi Moscow.
But did you for
Sham efshar l'shafshef. There's no way to scrub certain parts of the samovar. V'yesh samovarim shemishtamshim b'hem b'chametz gamur. Some samovars are used for real chametz during the year. Maxikim bo yein sraf. Some of these samovars are used not only for water, some of them are used for whiskey, which really is chametz. This incidentally deserves a little bit of a footnote. I'm just going to make a very small footnote. In another shir, we would have to speak at great length about why whiskey is chametz and whether it really is chametz. Whiskey is a distillate product. First, you take grains, make sour mash out of the grains. That's surely chametz, because the sour mash is made out of 5 grains, some rye, sometimes barley, whatever the grain is that the whiskey is being made out of. The sour mash that you begin with, which is fermented and has alcohol in it, typically around somewhere between 10 and 15% alcohol, that's chametz, no doubt about that. You take that sour mash, around 10, 15% alcohol, and you distill it. This distillation means you boil it, the fumes arise. Those fumes are directed into a cooling column where they're condensed again. And since alcohol has a lower boiling temperature than water does, the alcohol concentrate increases through distillation. So whiskey is a distillate product of chametz. The sour mash you began with is surely chametz. But here, it went through a phase. It's a technical term in chemistry. It went through a phase when it was just vapor in the air. Vapor in the air, is that chametz? I mean, if that were chametz, you wouldn't be allowed to breathe anywhere on Earth on Pesach. There's yeast and chametz just floating all around in microscopic amounts, but it's all around us all the time. Well, there's good reason to say that vapor in the air is not chametz. And if that's not chametz, what is the status when it's condensed again into high proof, into high alcohol content whiskey? And here, some of the poskim, not many, some of the poskim in the Middle Ages were lenient regarding the distillate product. And since that lenient opinion exists, not really an opinion which is embraced by principal poskim, but since the lenient opinion exists, it's on that basis that the entire practice, the entire minhag of selling chametz over Pesach began. The first time that Jews had commercial quantities of chametz in their houses or in their warehouses was in the whiskey business. Prior to Jews entering the whiskey business in the 16th, 17th century, there's no such thing as commercial quantities of chametz. If the housewife wanted to serve pasta, what they call it Yiddish Lakshen, pasta to the family, she would take flour and mix it with water, knead it, roll it out very fine, cut the dough and boil it. The commercial quantities of chametz really did not exist before the whiskey industry. And when Jews had commercial quantities of whiskey, the question arose what to do with it over Pesach. And since there is some tiny, tiny room to say that maybe it's not chametz at all. So the whole leniency of selling chametz was introduced for that. Okay. Of course, something which cannot be perceived with ordinary vision, something so small that you cannot see with ordinary vision is halachically irrelevant, but, but that is the basis for the leniency regarding inhaling the vapors. But once the vapors are condensed again into a liquid, which you see, you drink it, it is clearly perceptible, well, it reverts to its status of chametz again. After all, the Mishnah teaches us that if you have a pool of water, maybe it's a mikveh, maybe it's a Roman bath where people are just bathing in the pool of water. If the water is hot, the steam rises, condenses on the windows, on the cold windows. You have now water droplets on the inside of the windows. The Mishnah teaches us that the halachic status of those drops condensing on the inside of the windows in the bathhouse, the halachic status is identical to the halachic status of the water in the pool. If the water in the pool was ritually pure, tahor, because it's a kosher mikveh, then those drops of water are pure. If it's just an ordinary Roman bath and people have been bathing themselves in there, people who previously been in contact with dead human bodies or whatever the tumah, the impurity status is of the pool of water, that's the status of the droplets which condense. Therefore, it follows that when the whiskey is distilled, the distillate product has the same halachic status as the sour mash it came from, and that's chametz. That's by far the mainstream opinion. Tov, in any event, the samovars that people were koshering, some of them were even using them for chametz all year long. Gam hamayim sheshovchim bo, shovchim bekelim machzikim bo yain sraf v'seichecha, and to fill the samovar all year long, to fill it with water. Before heating the water, you pour in with a utensil which is also used for pouring whiskey. And how does one scrub the inside? Nowadays, hard for people in the modern kitchen to imagine how they used to do things in the old-time kitchen where they had vanishing little water to work with. Right, every pail of water had to be schlepped from the river or from the well. They didn't have all of the sponges and the cloths and the steel wool. They didn't have all the cleaning implements that we have. They surely didn't have soap or any detergent or anything like that. How did they clean things? Well, they would rub with bread, with wet bread would be good to rub things with in order to clean them. Omed tamid ben akmachim. And the samovar is in the kitchen all the time, and all around is real chametz. You have sacks of flour in the kitchen. You have all kinds of real chametz in the kitchen, right next door, within inches, within centimeters of where the samovar is. We have to consider the samovar to really be a chametz-stick utensil all year long. Minhagi tamid b'chol makom heyoti l'rav. Any place where I had the job of the Rav of the village, wherever I was the Rav of the village, I would make a speech on Shabbos Agadol, telling the people, do not kasher your samovars to prepare them for Pesach. And then we go one step further. Well, something went wrong with my text. That's not good. Where is it? Well, the next few lines of the Torah Avigdor are not available to show you on the screen. Something went wrong with my preparation of the text. Let me tell you what he continues and says. What he continues and says is as follows. Me'ikar hadin. As far as the fundamental halacha is concerned, this is the rule. This rule is formulated in the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch and all the big name poskim say as follows: If you want to kosher a utensil, from treif to kosher, from milchik to parva, from chametz to Pesach, if you want to kosher a utensil, you must ask yourself first, what was the majority use of that utensil? Was majority use of the utensil for boiling meat, for boiling noodles, for boiling something that you want to kosher it now? Or was the primary use, the majority use, dry? Was it a spit that was used to roast meat over the fire, or the grill that held the meat over the fire? If it was dry contact, then the only way to kosher the utensil is by libun, dry heat, until it glows red hot. If it was liquid contact, then it's sufficient to kosher the utensil with boiling water. Majority use determines which method of koshering you're going to use. The common minhag, and most rabbis instruct their flocks as follows. It's wise when koshering a utensil for Pesach to pay attention even to the minority use. And even if the minority use was dry, go for the stricter method of koshering, namely dry heat, until it glows red hot. That's good advice, which rabbis are giving their communities. But remember, there's a little bit of distance between good advice and what is halachically absolutely required. Bottom line, minimum halachic standards, according to the Shulchan Aruch and all the other big poskim, say that the koshering of the utensil depends upon its majority use. And in the case of the samovar, which is its primary use, perhaps close to 100% in the course of the year, was just for hot water, to boil water. Halachically speaking, as far as the Ikar Hadin, the minimum requirements of halacha are concerned, as far as that's concerned, well, if the majority use was not wet chametz and not dry chametz, the majority use was not chametz at all, it doesn't require koshering at all, mi'ikar hadin. Nonetheless, it's an advisable, a praiseworthy, a commendable chumrah, strict practice above and beyond what halacha minimally requires. It's a good practice, recommended, advised, encouraged, a recommended practice, kosher the utensil, immersion in boiling water, or if that's impractical, fill it with water, boil the water, and let the water overflow, and the boiling water will then contact everything on the outside surface as well. Minimum requirement is the samovar, not the samovar that you use for whiskey, the samovar which you use only for water all year long, and maybe sometimes chametz came into it. As long as that's only a maybe, it just has to be clean. And if you can clean it for Pesach, all is well. That is the bottom line conclusion of the Toras Avigdor. And if you have difficulty finding the original text, I don't have the whole thing on the screen. Feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to send you the lines, which for some reason got dropped from the screen here. Let's go one step further. The Ma'adanei Shmuel. His name was Reb Shmuel Borstein. He was also from the 19th century, and he wrote as follows in his commentary on the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And he's quite clear about the halacha which I just formulated. Mi'ikar hadin, as far as the bottom line minimal requirements of halacha are concerned, hasamovarim einon tzrichim shum hechshel Pesach. The samovar requires no special preparation for Pesach. Why not? Kevan she'ein mishtamshim behem b'chol hashana. all year long, it's used only for water. And is it possible that some chametz came into it? Well, of course, anything's possible, but that's not enough of a problem to require koshering. ואף יש לחוש שבאמצע השנה נפל לפעמים איזה פירור חמץ בתוך המים שבסמובר, even though it's quite reasonable to suspect that at some point during the year a crumb of chametz fell into it. Possible. I mean, maybe it even happened. Maybe it probably happens. Kevan d'v'chol hashana ein nizharim beperurei chametz. Since all year long you have crumbs of chametz in the house, and when you're filling the samovar, of course, it's possible, maybe even likely, that a crumb fell into it. Aval, but be'emet, indeed. Afilu im yihye kain, even if it is so, even if we know definitively it is so, even if we remember that a crumb of bread once fell into the samovar, nonetheless, it's been refilled. The samovar has been refilled with water so many times. Surely the amount of water which has gone through the samovar is at least 60 times greater than the amount of any chametz which happened to fall in there, and all is well. Balach edo chosev. And since we're talking about a liquid, we do not have to worry about this tiny amount of chametz waking up again on Pesach. Now, this is an important idea, which also deserves a shiur by itself. If we have mixtures of dry ingredients, potato starch mixed with a little bit of wheat flour, ordinary chametz flour, a little bit, a few grains, a few flakes of ordinary flour, chametz, ordinary flour that you bake bread out of. A few flakes of ordinary flour fell into the potato starch. Well, it's batal b'shishim, right? It's less than a 60th. Oh, but if we're talking about dry mixtures, the rule on Pesach is choser v'ni'ur, that the chametz wakes up again on Pesach, and on Pesach the rule of 1/60th does not apply, and therefore the potato starch is asur, definitely prohibited. But in liquid mixtures, once it's batal b'shishim before Pesach, the chametz does not wake up again on Pesach. So even if it's true that, even if we know definitively that a chametz crumb fell into the samovar, we don't have to worry about that. And you can find all these rules about what wakes up again on Pesach and what doesn't. He gives the source in the Magen Avraham to look that up. V'af kan, chashash mishum shema nafal lif'amim eze pirur chametz b'ain. The fear, the suspicion, the suffix, the doubt that maybe some chametz once fell into the samovar during the year, nish'ar sham, and maybe the crumb is still there. That suffix, that doubt, that worry, b'mekamot t'mumim, and maybe the bit of chametz is still in the samovar, in some crevice somewhere, hidden in some gap in there where you can't even see it. Maybe it's still there, you don't even see it. And you can't clean very well inside the samovar. And when Pesach comes, and you fill up the samovar, you fill it up with water, and the taste of the chametz is going to go into the water. When you come to drink the tea, or the water from the samovar, you might encounter a bit of that crumb. A bit of that crumb might actually end up in your mouth and you'll swallow it. For this reason, it would be better not to use the samovar on Pesach, even if you would kosher it by Hagala. Well, if you're afraid of that crumb that might have, even if you know it fell in during the year, and it's still hidden somewhere, you're afraid it's still hidden somewhere in the samovar, that's a good reason not to use the samovar on Pesach. But if we think about this clearly, ein sarich lachush, there's no reason to be concerned about all of these worries. Me'ikar adin, as far as bottom line halacha is required, kevan she'ein mishtamshim behem bifnim b'shum pa'am b'meshech hashana rak mayim belvad, since all year long we don't purposely put any chametz in there, since all year long we fill the samovar only with water, im kein lo garam meduchot shalanu, it follows that the samovar is halachically equivalent with our mortar and pestle. I always get confused with mortar and pestle, which is the mortar and which is the pestle. But mortar and pestle is a bowl in which you put things that you want to grind up, and with the masher, I forget which is the mortar and which is the pestle, you grind up, you put your black pepper kernels into the mortar and you pound them, and you get black pepper powder. Well, our mortars and pestles, which in those days every household was equipped with one, how else would you grind pepper? The she'ein dachin behem chametz kol hashana. So an extra yud got into that word, an extra vav got into that word dachin. All year long, we use our mortar and pestle only for black pepper kernels and other non-chametz spices. Salt back in those days came in lumps. You had to put the lumps of salt into the mortar and pestle and grind them into crystals. But all year long, we use our mortar and pestle to grind things which are not chametz. Rak karkum v'neglach. The worst, we would use our mortar and pestle for is kitniot. Karkum is turmeric. Turmeric is a bright yellow tuber. You mash it into powder. I buy it already pulverized, and you add the turmeric to all kinds of foods. Turmeric is one of the super nutritious foods. You only use a little bit of it, but it's packed with everything imaginable that's good and doesn't have any of the bad stuff in it. That's karkum, turmeric. In Arabic, the word is kurkum. Right? In Hebrew, the word is karkum. But in Arabic, kurkum, and Israelis generally use the Arabic name for turmeric, kurkum. It's kitnius on Pesach, and another year we could talk about what is and what is not kitnius. But chametz is not. And negelach, modern Hebrew, it's tziporen, cloves, kind of spice, and kind of dried spice. You pound the cloves in the mortar and pestle to make powder, and nowadays you can buy it already pulverized, but it's not chametz. Me'ikar adin eno tzarich lachush behem shemen nafal l'ptochem lifamim peru chametz. You don't have to be concerned that the mortar and pestle was occasionally, or even once, used for chametz, but the Eved hitiru afilu below hagala. The poskim agreed that although it is preferable to immerse your mortar and pestle in boiling water to prepare it for a Pesach, that's not essential. It's not absolutely essential. It's only good advice. It's only a chumrah, a strict practice, me'al me'ever, beyond and above the requirements of halacha. Me'ikar hadin, as far as the bottom line halacha is concerned, you can use your mortar and pestle from all year long for Pesach because it was never used for any chametz. And in concept, the samovar is no different from the mortar and pestle, and the mortar and pestle has been discussed by poskim since the Middle Ages, since late antiquity, and the bottom line consensus regarding the mortar and pestle is it would be preferable to kosher it by immersion in boiling water, but That's not really necessary. It's only good advice. That's only a strict practice above and beyond what halacha requires, and therefore the same principle applies to the samovar. You probably don't have a samovar in your house, but you probably do have an electric water kettle, or a water kettle that sits on the gas, or electric stove. And in concept, once again, your water kettle is no different from the samovar that they were discussing, which in turn, in concept, is no different from the mortar and pestle, which has been discussed since late antiquity. Uh, is it advisable? Is it commendable? Or is it praiseworthy to kosher it by immersion in boiling water? Of course it is. Someone who has not done that, is it usher? Is it prohibited to use the mortar and pestle, the samovar, the water kettle on Pesach? No, it's not actually prohibited. Well, up to this point, we've seen a great basis for leniency. And this would apply again to the mixer that we saw on the initial screen, which is used only for fruit smoothies and never actually used for chametz. Is it possible that chametz fell into it during the year? Of course it's possible. Maybe even we know it fell in once during the year. It doesn't matter. Me'ikar adin, as far as the fundamental halacha is concerned, you're allowed to use it as is. For Pesach, it's advisable, commendable, praiseworthy, all kinds of good things to kosher it in boiling water, but it's not actually necessary. Let's go one step further. All of this leniency is built on what the poskim have to teach us regarding the mortar and pestle. And you remember that on the previous screen, we were referred to a discussion in the Magen Avram regarding those mortars and pestles. Let's see that discussion at this time. These are the words of the Magen Avram regarding Meducha, regarding mortar and pestle. Katav Tur, first he quotes the Tur. The Tur was written by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher at the very end of the Middle Ages. It is the code, the handbook of halacha, upon which the Shulchan Aruch in the next generation was based. It's like, until the Shulchan Aruch was published, this was the definitive handbook, the definitive code of Jewish law. It says in Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the author, is in Spain at the end of the Middle Ages. He wrote, Hayu regilim laduch betocho shumin u'devarim charifim. All year long, we pound in the mortar and pestle garlic and other sharp foods, dried hot peppers, all kinds of black pepper, all kinds of things which are charif. We grind, we mash in the mortar and pestle. Im perurei lechem, and we often add breadcrumbs when we mash the black pepper, when we mash the garlic, whatever it is. Many recipes call for doing that together with breadcrumbs. This is not the time to survey recipes from late medieval Spain, but they were doing it that way. Lachein, therefore, yesh rotzim lamad tzarich libun. Therefore, some people say that if you want to use the mortar and pestle on Pesach, it requires libun, dry heating, because the contact between the breadcrumbs and the mortar and pestle was dry, not being boiled, and therefore you have to heat, dry heat. You have to heat the mortar and pestle until it glows red hot. Typically, they're made out of stone, the whole things. Dami lebeit saor, beit charosik, very similar to the containers in which you store chametz all year long, which require libun, maximum temperatures. Hu pasak t'sagi b'hagala. But the Tur said it's enough just boiling water. You don't actually have to do libun. Now remember, he's talking about mortar and pestle made out of stone. They were tough. I mean, they're made to be tough. They don't crack. They don't break so easily. Boiling water will not ruin them. The tour required boiling water for the mortar and pestle because the mortar and pestle had been used all year long for recipes where breadcrumbs get mashed together with the black pepper and the garlic or other harif things. Linere, it seems to me, these are the words of the Magen Avram, 17th century Eastern Europe. Linere, it seems to me, the Magen Avram says, Shebemnuchat Shalanu, in our mortars and pestles here in 17th century Poland, we don't know any recipes that call for bread crumbs when we mash things in the meducha, in the mortar and pestle. Oh, they had such recipes in late medieval Spain, Yecholiot, but here in Poland, never heard of anyone mashing breadcrumbs as part of the recipe, together with the garlic and the red peppers and the black peppers and whatever. And we don't do that. Rak korkum v'neglach. As far as Pesach is concerned, the worst is turmeric, which is kitnius, and cloves, which are kitnius. That's the worst. Chametz. We've never heard of anyone putting chametz into the mortar and pestle. Chametz, the things we do put into the mortar and pestle, maybe the kitnius, but chametz definitely not. Lachein, therefore, it's surely enough to do boiling water, and you don't need the glowing red heat. If you ground up stuff in the mortar and pestle and added it to the food you're cooking, then we have to consider the question, the stuff that went into the mortar and pestle, was it something big that had been cut with a chametz knife and then small pieces put into the mortar and pestle and then pounded? If that's what happened, maybe everything is now chametz stick, which is made in the mortar and pestle. But b'diavad, there's no reason to be strict on this. Shema balatocho perur chametz ein osrim b'diavad, since we don't actually know definitively that there was any chametz in the mortar and pestle, since it's only a chashash, something we're afraid that might have happened incidentally here in Poland. Me'ikar adin, as far as the fundamental halacha is concerned, no koshering is required. So if the mortar and pestle requires me'ikar hadin, fundamentally no koshering, the same is true of the samovar, and therefore the same is true of the water kettle, which you have in your kitchen, whether it's an electric water kettle or the older type that sits on the electric or gas cooker. Let's continue. I'm going in chronological order. Let's now go down into the 18th century, the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Shulchan Aruch Harav that we're about to quote from was written by the Baal Tanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe had a absolutely spectacular reputation, not only in the world of Hasidism, but also in the world of halacha. He's one of the few giants who wore both hats, gedula, greatness in Hasidism and greatness in halacha. The Shulchan Aruch, which he wrote, unfortunately has exactly the same name as the Shulchan Aruch, which was written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, and therefore in the yeshiva world, the Shulchan Aruch, written by the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, is called the Shulchan Aruch Harav. In Chabad circles, in Lubavitch circles, the same book is called the Shulchan Aruch of the Baal Tanya, or the Shulchan Aruch of the first Rebbe, but something has to be added to the real title, Shulchan Aruch, in order to distinguish it from the Shulchan Aruch, written by Rabbi Yosef Karo. In any event, he wrote as follows, B'duchot Shalanu, and I cannot overemphasize the influence of the Sefer we're quoting now, on more or less every page of the Mishnah Berurah, for example. There's an example of the Mishnah Berurah relying upon the decisions of this Sefer that we're looking at now, immensely influential. Meduchot Shalanu, our mortars and pestles, 18th century Eastern Europe. Shala'olam ein dachin ben peru lechem, we never use them to mash up breadcrumbs, lo shar chametz, or any other kind of chametz. We all year long, we never use our mortars and pestles for any kind of chametz. Afilu hishal barzel nechoshet, even if you don't have one of the stone mortars and pestles, those are the better ones, the ones made out of stone. The cheaper ones are made out of iron and bronze. Even if you have a cheaper one made out of metal, ein sarich lula ben klal. No koshering by libun is required for Pesach. Afal hagila ein tzarich ikar hadin. Even boiling water is not required as far as ikar hadin, the fundamental halacha, is concerned. So the leniency, which began many generations earlier, is still being embraced by the Baal HaTanya in the 18th century. Since it's indeed possible that once there was a crumb of bread in the course of the year in the mortar and pestle, and afterwards you might have mashed sharp foods in there, like black pepper, and maybe the breadcrumb was mashed together with the garlic or together with the black pepper. It's possible that it happened. Nivla gamhu imahem betocha meducha, in which case the mortar and pestle has now absorbed the taste of the chametz together with the taste of the black pepper that you were grinding. Lefichach tov lach mil hagila b'kli rishon. Therefore, it's good, and he's exquisitely precise in his terminology. Therefore, it's tov. Therefore, it's good to prepare the mortar and pestle for use on Pesach by Hagala, immersion in boiling water. Now, rabbinic Hebrew has an extraordinarily rich semantic field to describe things which are halachically required. Tzarich, muchrach, chayav. I mean, the list of words in rabbinic Hebrew goes on and on. When things are required by halacha, when halacha demands, when halacha obligates things, tov is not on the list of obligatory terminology. It's pretty obvious. You don't need me to tell you that. And one of the many reasons that the Sefer we're quoting now is so influential, one of the many reasons that it had such an impact on subsequent generations of poskim, like the Mishnah Berurah, is that the author, the Baal HaTanya, was so exquisitely precise in his terminology, so exquisitely careful in his formulation of the halacha. Tov l'hachmir. It's good, it's advisable, it's commendable, it's praiseworthy, it's all kinds of good things. Good to do Hagala and prepare the mortar and pestle by Hagala. You want good advice? Advice? Do Hagala. If you're not asking for good advice, if you're asking for the halacha, what's the halacha demand? The answer is halacha demands nothing. If you're asking for good advice is it's advisable to immerse it in boiling water. The Rav has to listen very carefully to the question that the Rav is being asked. Is the questioner asking, what does halacha demand? If that's the question, the answer is nothing. Halacha demands nothing. If the question is, what does the Rav advise? What would be the best approach regarding the mortar and pestle? Or if that's the question, the Rav recommends immersion in boiling water. The Rav has to be very careful in listening to exactly what the question is. V'im dachu ba tavlin b'Pesach below hagola l'tam b'tavshil. If you used then the meducha, if you used then the mortar and pestle to grind black pepper or something on Pesach, and you put the black pepper powder into the food, mutar le'chol hatavshil b'Pesach. Of course, you can eat it on Pesach together with the spices that were mashed, that were ground in the mortar and pestle. Bottom line, it's only a chash, only a fear that maybe there was once chametz in it, and that is not sufficient to require special preparation for Pesach. It's only sufficient to advise or recommend koshering for Pesach. B'shvil chash zeh ein le'asor b'diavad. We're surely not going to prohibit any food which was made with the powder coming from the mortar and pestle on Pesach. The rule is ein machzikim isur. Ein machzikim isur. Chazaka. Let's get the word chazaka typed correctly on chat. Chazaka is the technical rabbinic word for a presumption. What halacha presumes to be true, what halacha presumes to be correct until there's evidence to the contrary. And halachic discourse is chock full of discussions of chazaka. In every case, it's important to establish what the halachic chazaka is. What does halacha presume to be correct until there's evidence to the contrary? I'll give you one example you'll understand right away. We have someone who comes to our village. We have someone who comes to our town from far away, and the question arises, is this person really Jewish or not? Very important to know if the person wants to marry a member of our community, right? We have to know whether the person's Jewish or not. Well, if the person came from a place where the majority population is Jewish, the person came from Israel today where the majority population is Jewish, and the person acts, behaves like a Jewish person, the chazaka, the presumption is, halacha presumes that that person is Jewish until there's evidence to the contrary. Well, the rule here is ein machzikin isur. Halacha does not presume that a utensil is prohibited until there's evidence to the contrary. Just the opposite. Halacha, the chazaka, the presumption is that the utensil is permitted until there is evidence to the contrary. The chazaka, the preliminary presumption of halacha is mutter, permitted until proven otherwise. He goes on and says, these are still the words of the Shulchan Aruch Harav, Harei mefurish yotzei, we draw the explicit and clear conclusion, shemashum mu'at pa'amim ein choshishin shema nish'ar be'ein, just because the mortar and pestle might have been used a few times in the course of the year with breadcrumbs, we do not presume that there is still any chametz there until proven otherwise. Imkain, makol shekain, all the more so with a samovar. They were still using some of that. Still today, people use samovars. Afilu pamachat b'shana ein mishtamshim b'chametz be'ein. We never put bread into our samovars. Rak mayim ba'alma, we fill them only with water. Imkain, makol shekain. Therefore, all the more so, built on the leniency of the mortar and pestle. Since we're lenient regarding the mortar and the pestle, all the more so are we lenient regarding the samovar. Ein lachush b'zeh me'ikar adin. As far as fundamental halacha is concerned, there's no reason to worry about the samovar. He continues and says, Nimtze de ein machzikin isa metoch lifnim. Even if some chametz touched the outside of the samovar, some of us sat in the kitchen all year long. Is it possible that someone walked by with a sandwich? Is it possible that the outside surface was touched by some chametz? Of course it's possible, but the halacha does not presume that anything got inside the samovar until there's evidence of that. The halacha is acceptable until there's evidence to the contrary. And if you're worried that some breadcrumb is stuck on the outside of the samovar, well, just take a look and clean it. I mean, what's the problem? It would be obvious to casual inspection. If there's any chametz stuck on the outside, just clean it. What's the problem? Lachein Makol Amur, based on everything that we've said now, these are still the words of the Balatanya, Yesh l'tzaded lehakel, we should be lenient and use on Pesach. We should use our samovars on Pesach by immersion in boiling water. If you kasher them by immersion in boiling water, that's good. That's advisable, and that's surely sufficient. Umisha yado maseget lilaben et samovar. If you can heat the samovar dry until it glows red hot, or if you can afford to buy a new one made out of tin for Pesach, those are cheaper, the ones made out of tin, b'vadai matov, matov, it is good, it is advisable to kasher by immersion in boiling water. It is good, it is advisable to buy a new one for Pesach. That's good, that's commendable, that's praiseworthy, but once again, he's not using any of the rich rabbinic terminology for things that are halachically required. Therefore, mi she'ein yado maseget, therefore someone who cannot afford to kasher by libun, someone who is lenient and uses it with only hagala, only immersion in boiling water, well, we're not going to say anything bad about that person. Mikol makom letzet yedei kol chashot, if he wants to be really very strict and avoid all problems, fill up your samovar with water, let it boil, let the water overflow, and the boiling water will kasher the inside and the outside. If you want to be machmir, go for it. That's advice. Not foolish. We're surely not going to mock people who are kosher in their samovars. On the contrary, if they ask for good advice, we'll recommend it. But it's not actually required. At this point, I want to add one point which strikes me as being of fundamental importance, not only in connection with Pesach, but throughout the length and breadth of Torah, B'chol Torah Kula. Moshe Feinstein developed in the course of his writings the following fundamental principle: a chumrah, a strict practice above and beyond what halacha requires, is commendable, advisable, praiseworthy, all kinds of good things, if it is a practice which anyone could do. On the other hand, a chumrah, a strict practice above and beyond what halacha requires, that only the wealthy people can afford to do, but ordinary people couldn't afford that, it's not even advisable, it's not even commendable for rich people. In order for a chumrah to be advisable, in order for it to be commendable, it must be possible for everyone to do it. Something that only the wealthy could afford to do. That's not advisable for anyone. That's an important idea, an idea of fundamental importance. Let's go one generation later. Now we're into the 20th century. The Aruch HaShulchan, one of my favorite halacha books, he speaks about the samovar. Anu magi'ilinoto, we immerse the samovar in boiling water. Lefisha Medina einam tzrichim klum, even though, as far as halacha is concerned, no immersion in boiling water is required, but that's what we do. Be'emet, hasamovar hu halal rachav. The samovar has a wide opening. It's easy to clean inside. You can look inside. Min hadin. It does not require any kashering at all, but that's what we do. That's a chumrah, a strict practice, which is commendable. Going down to the end of the 20th century, the Yesod Yeshurun, Rav Gedalia Felder, one of the leading poskim of North America, he was a Rav in Toronto for many years, originally from Eastern Europe, draws exactly the same conclusions. Bottom line, utensils like hot water kettles, which are used for which are not used for chametz all year long, only used for water or things which are halachically harmless on Pesach, me'ikar adin, require no preparation for Pesach. They just have to be clean. Is it advisable? Is it commendable? Is it praiseworthy? Should you kasha them? Yes. That's definitely advisable, commendable, and praiseworthy to be strict above and beyond the minimum requirements of halacha. We're going to pause at this time. I wish you a good week and a safe week, and eventually a chag kasher v'sameach, and look forward to seeing you all again in the continuation of the Web Yeshiva. Until then, shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Really good as always. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.